Good to start.
All right. Hello, everybody. We are just broadcasting live here now. Good evening. Hello from all parts of Eastern Ontario and from Lakeland, Alberta, with our special guest Shannon Stubbs in tonight. My name's Eric Duncan, the Member of Parliament for Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry. And I'm just going to pass it over to two of my other Eastern Ontario colleagues to say hello. First, Michael Barrett.
Hey, good evening, folks. I'm Michael Barrett, the Member of Parliament in Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes. Pleasure to join you this evening. It's very exciting, of course, to have my colleagues, speaking to constituents in my community and across Eastern Ontario. So, looking to be able to provide some answers about C-21 and what you can do, and looking forward to the evening.
Awesome. Sounds good. And we'll pass it over to Jamie Schmale.
Good evening from Cottage Country in Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock. Again, I'm Jamie Schmale. Looking forward to a great conversation. We have an amazing public safety critic in Shannon Stubbs. She has lots of information to share, and looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Good. And so what we'll do tonight, just so everybody folks know, there's the Q&A section that you see as an attendee or participant. If you have questions as we're going through the presentation tonight, just put them into the Q&A. And I see that it's working. Somebody said we were live about a couple minutes before we got on, which is good. So you'll know the agenda here. I'm passing it over to the member for Carleton, Pierre Poilievre, who's going to be the moderator with our special guest, the Shadow Minister for Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Shannon Stubbs. So Pierre, take it away. The other guys will turn our cameras off and let them take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric, not just for putting together this great conversation, but also for your wonderful service as a mayor in the Dundas area. Of course, that was back when you were a young man. You were 22 years old as mayor. I think the youngest mayor in all of Canada at the time. And now with you being, I think, in your late 20s, early 30s, you've become an elder statesman. We're very proud to have you in our caucus leading the charge on this and so many other issues. We have the great Jamie Schmale from the Kawarthas, who's working hard to spread the message about freedom and opportunity. And he has a great podcast to which I advise everybody to tune in weekly. And then Michael Barrett, who has led the charge against Liberal corruption in regards to the WE scandal at the Ethics Committee. He's been a strong voice for accountability and ethics in government, and I'm very proud to call him my neighbor here in the riding of Carleton. I'm Pierre Poilievre. I'm broadcasting out of my basement, which is my command and control center, and where I live in South Ottawa. And with us today is a proud Albertan and a great Canadian, Shannon Stubbs, who's coming to you from her kitchen in Lakeland, Alberta, where she is on her farm, and there she raises horses and has lived involved in farming her entire life. He is a great champion of law-abiding firearms owners. Those are the people who are under attack with Bill C-21. Of course, Bill C-21 is designed to pursue the law-abiding hunters, farmers, and sport shooters who live within what is already a heavily controlled system of gun control. And instead of going after the hardened criminals who commit violent offenses with firearms, this bill goes after you, the honest, the law-abiding people of the land. Shannon Stubbs is the Shadow Minister of Public Safety, and she is going to make some introductory remarks to tell you what's in the bill. Then we're going to go to your questions and comments to make sure that we address what is on your mind. Please make your comments in writing, and we'll get through them as quickly as possible. Over to Shannon Stubbs.
Thanks, Pierre. And I just want to thank Eric, Michael, and Jamie for putting this together. It really is a pleasure to be able to speak with your constituents in this way. And what I can't wait for most is when I get to do it in real life and come on out and visit all of you in person. And maybe we could time it around some DU dinners or fish and game auctions and dinners, and that would be the best. So Pierre has summed up exactly the consequences of Bill C-21. And it is a pleasure for me able to, well, pleasure might be the wrong word, but I am grateful to be able to spend some time with you tonight and walk you through what will be really the main impacts and implication of the legislation on you, on your hobbies, on your passion, on your lifestyles, and on your businesses. Just a quick summary just around the status of the legislation so that participants here know. It was first introduced in February and then debated a little bit on 2 separate days in February and April for about an hour and then 2.5 hours respectively. A legislative update for you all that we just learned today is that it will be coming back into Parliament this coming week for further debate. And by the end of that, it will have been scrutinized and debated by members of Parliament for a total of 6 hours. Conservatives intend to have as many speakers and as many members of Parliament as possible participate in that debate. I can tell you that all of our colleagues on the call here today have all requested to speak to the legislation. I think 45 members are already planning on participating. Now, I don't want to make a promise, though, that we can't keep, because you probably have noticed that the Liberals are fond, despite their rhetoric, of imposing time allocation and closure on debates. We don't know if they will do that yet, but just so you know that Conservatives are putting a full court press of debate and scrutiny on this legislation in Parliament. After that stage, it will go to committee, and maybe at the end of all of this, I chatted with Eric earlier, we'll talk about some actions that can be taken after that. And there are ways in which you, on behalf of your clubs and on behalf of your own best interest, can participate in the parliamentary process. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, I am going to, I'm already seeing a question about the amnesty. Okay, I'll try not to get distracted and answer the questions right as we go, which of course I want to do. So here's what I'll say briefly about C-21. It makes several sweeping changes and amendments. It brings in both new laws and adjusts current laws, primarily to the Criminal Code and to the Firearms Act. So what I'll do is I'll talk about the main parts relating to the Criminal Code that will impact you, and then the Firearms Act. What most of you, and it looks like one of the questioners is focusing on this issue reasonably. What most of you will have expected this bill to have done was really to outline the details on what the Liberals call their buyback and what I call their confiscation program for the prohibited firearms that they banned first in their May 2020 OIC, which originally, you will all know on this call, banned 1,500 firearms and variants, and now is up to more than 1,900 because the list keeps expanding. It turns out that there's very slim details around the logistics of the confiscation program in this bill. I'll get to that at the end. I suspect that's what many of you will be interested in, but I'll just talk to you about a couple of things in the first place. So, an extremely concerning aspect of C-21, of which I'm sure you will all be aware, is the introduction of what's known as red and yellow flag laws into Canada. Now, all of you will know that there are 5 different escalating current options for there to be interventions in the case of suspicion of a threat to personal or to public safety by a firearms owner. And right now, though, that involves due process, it involves notice, and there are also, in the cases of emergency needs for intervention, like in the case of suicide or domestic violence, there are already multiple overlapping systems that allow for immediate interventions in those cases. What this new law does, frankly, what these 2 new laws do, frankly, is turn the system on its head to one that is an act first, ask questions later, removes due process from the system. So what the red flag law will allow is for any person, a neighbor, a friend, a person down the road, anybody, to go to court and seek an approval of a prohibition order and I think we can anticipate that often these things will come together, a search and seizure warrant. And both of those things can happen without notice. So right now, that has to happen through the court process, that has to happen with lawyers under rules of evidence. Right now, law enforcement officers do have the ability to go in when they suspect that there is an immediate threat. Once that situation proceeds through the court case, if it is found that they've acted improperly, then they have to go back through the warrant procedure. But this current this new law will allow for unprecedented powers for any Canadian or any individual to go and get a prohibition order or a search and seizure warrant on an individual, and also or on a third party who might provide firearms to an individual. And those would be without notice. So one can imagine the possibilities for abuse and for real damage to individuals' reputations and to careers for people who rely on firearms, because of course, a prohibition order is quite different, as each and every one of you will know, from a license revocation or a license review. It is a prohibition order. Prohibition orders are sweeping. They even touch on things like a person would not be able to use a pellet gun under a 30-day prohibition order. So it is an extremely serious consequence with almost unprecedented individual powers for individuals. And then the yellow flag law will allow for a chief firearms officer to temporarily suspend an individual firearms license launched by a CFO just on receipt of information that might question license eligibility. And so you probably know that right now CFOs already can inspect firearms owners and licenses for any reason that they deem appropriate. But cancellations and suspensions of licenses are, of course, only viable after a complete investigation. And so this would allow for a CFO to temporarily suspend a license during an investigation. And so those, I think maybe I'll just stop there. Those, I think everybody in this call will be well aware of the various stages that already exist for reviews of licenses and ultimate revocations. And so you can see what the changes under this new legislation will be, and they're quite concerning. There's also a real concern that red and yellow flag laws will also potentially be used to target people. They could be used to target minorities, target people for nefarious reasons. And you will know that the claim for these legislative changes by its proponents is that it will allow for faster action to prevent harm. But given the current situation that already a law enforcement officer in that case can get a warrant to intervene on a person for their protection, that can already happen 24 hours a day anytime right now. One interesting aspect, talking to several lawyers about this, is they said, yes, they will make the claim that this will better protect people at risk, except that there's two problems here. Not only are they bringing in a system that really does away with due process, but it also will even take longer potentially than the current situation in place. So we can get into a little bit more of those details later on if you want, but those are two major changes that you do all need to be aware of. Now, the other aspect that you've probably heard about, but probably don't believe can possibly be true, I'm here to confirm for you, it's that C-21 will prohibit the importation and exportation and the sale of all non-regulated air guns that look like modern firearms. So this will impact the airsoft industry. It will impact it will involve a partial ban on paintballs. It will impact BB guns, and obviously with a domino impact all the way down the supply chain for any and everybody involved in the airsoft industries, from competitive shooters to clubs to retailers. And so that you know, the Bloc and the NDP are likely to support C-21 overall, but both of those parties have criticized this particular ban and are calling for its removal. Obviously, conservatives oppose C-21 completely. And so the way that this provision will work is that it will make air guns now fall under the category of replicas, which are already prohibited, as most of you will know, under Canadian law. And there remains a legal gap now, which this legislation doesn't address then, for exactly what it is that they will do with people who do own air guns right now, because there is a gap in terms of a licensing framework. And so that is one of the issues that the Liberals must provide clarity on, related to the measures that they've got here on airsoft. You will probably have heard too of another major change, which will be C-21 allowing for municipalities to have the power to regulate on the sale, transport, and use of handguns. And if there were ever an aspect of this bill that made it clear that it is absolutely, as Pierre had said, targeted to law-abiding firearms owners, this provision is it. Because the way that you've probably heard, and you might be hopeful that there's possibility for a constitutional challenge of some sort on this aspect of the legislation, but the way that the drafters have, I think, aimed to get around this is by granting municipalities that power and then enforcing it through a condition on firearms licenses. So obviously that has the possibility to create a patchwork of different legislation and requirements and bylaws right across the country. And but the fact that the enforcement mechanism will be as a condition of a firearms license, I think is very instructive, because for residents in cities like Toronto who are experiencing increasing gang shootings with already prohibited, illegally smuggled and trafficked and imported firearms, you all know as well as I do that gangbangers aren't really worried about their paperwork, and they're not really worried about their licenses for their firearms. They're not using legally owned firearms in the first place, and they sure as heck aren't going to be worried about municipal handgun bylaws. So we can touch on that at the end too. There's a little bit of a call to action, I think, that some of you can do on that aspect, and we can all encourage your municipal representatives to speak out on that. And so we can talk about that a little bit later in the discussion. And maybe the last aspect I'll touch on, Pierre, and then I don't know if you think we can kind of get into it back and forth. It is dealing with, you are probably all wondering, for those of you who are caught in the May 22 order in council that prohibited now more than 1,900 firearms, what is happening about that, and what is happening about the buyback program? So here is what is interesting. Under Bill C-21, there is a framework, which is probably what you already expected because of the OIC. It is that all of those firearms that are prohibited can be kept, but you won't be allowed to use, import, export, or sale, or bequeath them. And you must have or acquire a restricted license, and then you must register that firearm. But they have decided so far that those firearms can continue to be kept in the residence of its owners. Now, this is where the Bloc and the NDP take issue, saying that those firearms should be removed out of homes completely. And I guess I would say that if one were to truly believe that it is the firearms that pose a public safety threat, then there's some merit to that argument. But the fact that Bill C-21 takes this approach, I think, is yet another proof point that this bill, as usual, targets law-abiding firearms owners and collectors. So the status of this so far is that, as you probably will all well remember, last summer, the government had put out a request for proposals to design their so-called buyback or the confiscation program for the now prohibited firearms. And they got no takers after putting that out for months. And then they tried again in October to have another RFP, to have credible organizations come in to help them design that program. And again, they got no takers. And so now, just recently in December, the government has announced that they have enlisted IBM to help them design this program to manage their prohibited firearms, but there are no details beyond that. And you're probably all wondering how it is that you will be compensated for this property that now you are being restricted from using, prohibited from using. And unfortunately, I don't have that answer for you either, because that's not in Bill C-21 either. The public safety minister has mused that they may provide compensation around $1,300 a firearm. He has suggested overall costs in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but of course, there are a variety of different think tanks who have assessed what will likely be the overall cost to government, both for administering this program and for compensation to law-abiding firearms owners. And they say that it can go well into the billions for total cost to government. So probably one last thing, Pierre, that people will be wondering quite rightfully is which firearms, how many will be involved, will be impacted by the confiscation program. And the truth is that C-21 doesn't provide concrete clarity on that either, because as probably every firearm owner on this call will know, since that OIC that banned 1,500 firearms and variants, that list just continues to be added to, and it's up over 1,900. So that is, I think, the main pieces of the legislation, probably that would be top of mind for everybody right now. But there are several other changes within Bill C-21.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That gives us a lot of insight into the details of the bill. We're now going to go to questions. We're going to start with Steve Nixon. The amnesty period for the buyback program ends this year. There is no money in the Liberal budget to follow through with this policy. What happens when the amnesty period expires and legally licensed firearms owners are still in possession of the banned semi-automatic rifles and shotguns?
Yes, so that's exactly bingo. That is the main question. That's exactly one of the legal gaps that exist right now. And so we have called for extension of the amnesty period, at least as a near-term item. And so we don't know the answer to that yet, except that once Bill C-21 passes, you must participate in the government's program to get a restricted license and register, and then keep those firearms in your home according to many of the requirements that will be developed in regulation after the passage of Bill C-21.
Right. Next question is
ostensibly you would at that point be an owner of a prohibited firearm.
Wow. So making criminals out of law-abiding people.
Precisely.
Douglas asks, Minister Blair has told the anti-firearms groups that it will not be possible for future Conservative governments to reverse the May 2020 OIC prohibitions. Is this true? How can a current government bind the actions of a future government?
Well, it's not true. And Pierre, I don't know if you want to expand. I've only been elected since 2015, and I've only ever been in opposition, which may just suit my personality just fine. But Pierre, of course, is a veteran member of Parliament and has also been a minister before. It is not true in the case of a majority government. The majority government absolutely has the power to repeal legislation and pass legislation. And our leader has been clear that he will repeal the May OIC, repeal Bill C-21, and repeal Bill C-75. and work with law-abiding firearms owners to establish effective and accessible firearms controls, which already exist in Canada, while also cracking down on actual gang members and actual criminals committing crimes with firearms.
Patrick asks, regarding the handgun ban, would a city council and mayor have to make these decisions?
They would. And I'm so glad that Patrick asked that, because here's a little call to action for everybody on this call. So there is an example, I've got the resolution here, and here's an example. A town in Ontario is already leading the fight on this. So in March, the town of Kingsville passed a resolution at their municipal council against their municipality taking action and passing bylaws on handguns. So one thing that I would say to everybody on this call is you absolutely should reach out to your municipal representatives, and
absolutely,
and you should ask them to get involved and to pass resolutions saying the same. And there's a whole bunch of umbrella organizations that municipalities are involved in, and they deal with the government all the time and give them feedback on legislation and policies. So if those municipalities could get even those representative organizations to take stances against this municipal handgun provision, I think that would go a long way to impacting this discussion. And I sure have heard from many municipalities who say, like, we've got enough on our plate. Municipalities are often in the situation of getting lots of programs and services downloaded on them already, enough to deal with, never mind having to contend with this issue on top of that. And I know that the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta have also already passed legislation saying that municipalities will not be able to pass bylaws related to municipal handguns. So that could be a thing that folks reach out to their provincial MLAs and MPPs about too.
All right, now we move on to Bill. What happens if there is no legislation in place by the end of the 2-year amnesty?
Good point.
Aha.
I think there will be, because I think the Liberals are going to be able to wrangle the Bloc and the NDP ultimately into supporting them to make C-21 law. But I love that question, because imagine, since we are in a minority government situation, imagine if we were able to stop this legislation. But the OIC would certainly still be in place. And so all of the firearms under the May 2020 OIC would continue to be prohibited. And that
but the rest of the bill obviously wouldn't apply.
Right.
Okay, so regarding airsoft guns, there has been a lot of confusion on this. I know the sale of them will be illegal. Will I be able to use my replica airsoft guns with C-21 in its current form, or will it be illegal to play? That's from Bill.
Yeah, I'm going to look at my notes here, because Bill is exactly right. There has been a lot of confusion and questions about this. And I know when the minister has communicated on it, that sometimes he has said contradictory things too. So here is what our understanding is. For those who already own airsoft guns, there is a risk if they choose to keep them, because this is the legal gap that I just sort of touched on earlier, didn't go into too much detail. There's this legal gap when it comes to owning what are classified as replica firearms right now, where individuals can't buy or sell them, but have all been allowed to own what they already have and to keep what they already have. So there is a licensing regime for replica firearms. Like companies in the film industry, for example, have a business license to possess those firearms that are considered replicas, but there's no regime in place, as you will all know, right now for civilian licensing to own replicas. So really there's no license. So people do own them right now and they haven't been taken away, but police could seize them. They do have the power to seize them if they had reason to do so. So this is the gap that we were talking, that I had mentioned, where the government so far has given no indication that they're proposing to fix anything related to this gap or to make the licensing framework more detailed, so that it does put people at risk. And it is unclear. So this will be one of the issues that we will pursue through the committee process to make sure that we can get them to account for details and exactly how people will be impacted on exactly like how Bill, I think it was, said.
All right, Aidan has said, what is the Conservative plan to hold the government accountable for this bill? So you've touched on that already, so maybe a quick short answer, because we have another question right after that.
We are using every tool possible to hold the Liberals to account on this bill. We are maximizing the number of speakers. We will be participating fully in the amendment process. Here's another favor that actually we could ask of people here in this call is this bill, after it gets done in the House of Commons part in this first phase, will then go into committee of the whole. And that's where experts will come in and witnesses can participate and amendments will be put forward and debated. And so I would invite each and every person on this call, if you'd like to either send in written submissions or participate as a witness in the committee process, I wholeheartedly encourage and invite you to connect with your member of parliament here, and then these guys can send to me and to my office your name, your information, and we'll do everything we can to help you participate and give direct feedback into the parliamentary process around this legislation too, as well, once it comes to committee. And I said we anticipate it to come to the Public Safety Committee, and I'm a member of that committee.
Excellent. RCMP kept a copy of the long gun registry after ordered to destroy it. This is the corruption at its finest, and they wonder why people don't trust the police. Can they use this as court evidence since it is destroyed, and can legal action be taken against them? If someone wants to stand up and challenge them? That's a very good question.
Yes, and I'm very glad that whoever that was asked this question. I actually meant to address that off the top because I know people have probably heard about it and wanted to know what we're doing about it. So I have already contacted the commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Luckie, to ask her to explain and to account for the claims that were made by the criminal defense lawyers who, as you probably will all be familiar with, in a couple of cases with their clients, they had ATIP'd the RCMP for the records of the firearms ownership of their various clients. They got certain information back, but then going through the process when Crown prosecutors did their disclosure to the criminal defense lawyers, there was information there that included long guns that were previously registered under what should be the disbanded long gun registry. And that was information that was not included in the RCMP ATIPs to those clients. So I'll tell you what we're doing on it. I also have a question about what are the legal parameters about that. And I am looking into every option for individual Canadians. I have called for Brenda Luckie to account for that, about whether or not there is any version whatsoever of the long gun registry still within the RCMP. I've also asked for her to confirm whether or not the records from what should have been the disbanded long gun registry was also used in the High River gun grab in Alberta you might have heard about in 2013. Now, this is, in my view, extremely, extremely serious. It is a grave, grave problem if it is true. From my perspective, this would, exactly as the questioner said, shake the confidence and trust in literally the foundations of our democracy. It would, if it is true, it would be an example of ignoring the will of Parliament. It was the former federal conservative government that legislated the disbanding of the long gun registry. All of those records were supposed to be destroyed. And there was even a former deputy commissioner of the RCMP who testified to a parliamentary committee that indeed all of those records had been destroyed, and Quebec's a little bit later than the rest of the country. And so I think that the possibility of this existing is extremely disturbing and troubling. And we are seeking information from the RCMP commissioner. We will be asking Bill Blair to take action onto it, and we'll see what other opportunities there might be to get this information. But we're working on it to find out exactly what is going on here.
Excellent. Jeremy asks, with regards to the advertising prohibition on use of firearms that glorifies violence, would a business be required to essentially clean house on current and past advertisements, such as those on social media? I could anticipate problems for paintball and airsoft fields, video games, movies, etc., if that's the case due to the ambiguous language used in the proposed legislation.
Yeah, good point. And he's right that it's ambiguous. So I don't know I can't give the details about what exactly the implications will be, except that he's got the overall impact correct. And this will be another one of those issues that we'll be pursuing details about in the committee process. But I think it's a very good question to ask about what will happen in terms of like existing, retroactive, and future advertising, and how wide the scope is.
Excellent. Okay, Robert, why does the government ignore the existence of the firearm records regulations? This regulation required the registrar to create a list of firearms classifications, and classifications could not be changed after a year. This should have been the firearms reference table, but it seems they avoided that. Where is the list? How can the RCMP make changes contrary to this regulation?
Yes. Well, I have heard this concern raised before, and I wonder the same thing. Yeah, remember, Pierre, we spoke out, we as conservatives spoke out a couple of years ago when suddenly the RCMP just started reclassifying. Reclassifying firearms unilaterally. And I agree. I think it's extremely concerning and makes a good point that it seems like they've just totally ignored it.
Yeah, that is troublesome. I don't see any new questions. I don't know if Eric is there, if he has some more that he can feed through the system here. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
We just got some. I got one here. The amnesty applies to the firearms that were legal before May 1 OIC. Will firearms not in the Canada Gazette banned after May 1st, as listed in the FRT as prohibited on May 6, actually be prohibited? Since my understanding is that the FRT is not a legal document that can be used in court, and they're not in the Canada Gazette. Therefore, not in the Canada Gazette. Are these guns covered under the amnesty? I've heard they are not covered since the amnesty is only for the OIC May 1st.
Yes, so this is another one of these issues that you would have expected in this legislation that took so long to be developed and was anticipated for the amount of time that it was, that you would expect that there would be clarity and details around exactly this, and it's about as clear as mud. This is yet another one of the legal gaps that exist and that I fear are going to be determined through regulations, additional regulations after the fact in Bill C-21. But I've also just made another note here to do some more digging on that and find more about that in the committee process.
All right, Robert says that in his opinion, the RCMP, and I'm quoting him now, weaseled out of the FRT being deemed the classification records. This is why they made such a big deal out of saying that the FRT is not a legal document. But if not classification record was made, how could the FRT not be that record?
Yes, right.
Can you answer that one?
I can't, but I think that Robert should follow up with my office.
Excellent. That's a
And we
good,
can work
that was a
together
good
on
course
this.
of action. Great. Do we have some more questions coming through? Okay.
Okay, yes, thanks, Robert. I see, will do.
And we have here a summary of the meeting. So Shannon, in a minute or less, do you want to round up what you've told us? We're going to, Robert's going to send you a message, but I want to thank all of the participants for their questions. We don't have any more questions coming in at this point. Eric, am I understanding you correctly that you want me to bring it to a wrap? I don't want to do it prematurely.
Yeah, but we can, just as we start to wrap up, Shannon can give some final comments there. And then actually, Shannon, which I just saw another question come in, which is a good one, actually. So I'll just pass this one along.
Okay.
Explaining the end of session coming up. We have a few weeks left in the House of Commons. What happens over the summer? So explaining about how the bill, if it's not passed in the House by June, it comes back in September and how that goes. So maybe not only the current status of the bill, but what happens when we go to summer break and that type of thing.
Right, so that's correct. So as of the end of this week, it will have had 6 hours of debate at the first stage, which is called second reading. And Pierre could probably tell you the whole history of the development of Parliament and why the stages are called readings and all these things. No pressure, Pierre. But after, for the rest of us mere mortals, what will happen after a second reading is that it will go through this process called Committee of the Whole. And that's where the parties will all try to make substantive amendments to the legislation and fix this mess as much as we can. And then it will go, and then it will come back for a third reading and final debate. Is there anything else procedurally that can happen in the middle of all that, Pierre? I thought maybe there was.
Maybe there could be a filibuster.
Yes, well, I think that we may try. Pierre, well, Pierre, can I volunteer you to do the 5-day filibuster?
No, you're the one who's going to be giving the big speech. And there could be an election. There could be an election. Yeah,
so that's the outstanding factor. That's probably what Eric's constituent is wondering about. So if session does wrap up in the third week of June, and the bill is not all the way through the process, then it will come back and we'll keep debating it in the fall. But yes, the outstanding question is whether or not there will be an election in the meantime. And if it's not fully all the way through all of its stages and then finalized as law with royal assent, then it dies on the order paper, right, Pierre?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it would have to be reintroduced from scratch. You'd have to start all over again.
Perfect. And then what we'll do is we'll just take one last question. They're kind of trickling in here, but I know we want to get the summary. Shannon, just want to add, Chris asks in here, just came in the chat, how likely do you think that the amnesty will not be extended? Police will start coming, and kicking down doors, knocking down doors, and taking newly prohibited firearms. They all know previously restricted, and with no minimal compensation. What's the time frame in terms of the order on these things? Has there been any word or indication? And maybe from a technical point of view, you were talking, I think it'd be important for the attendees to know as well, the difference of what's in the bill, but then a lot of things that are determined later through regulation or through the minister's decision. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about the bill itself, but then what are some of the other things and how they get decided afterwards, the devil in the details, for lack of a better word? Yeah, so that's some of these legal gaps that we've been touching on in terms of like when people are looking at the legislation and you're reading some parts of it and you're saying, okay, I kind of get this overall, but what happens in this scenario or this scenario related to airsoft, related to which exact firearms will be impacted by this confiscation program that the Liberals will be implementing. These are the details that likely will be developed by regulations after the passage of the legislation. So as of right now, it is uncertain. And I think that they should extend the amnesty period. We've asked for that because they've made such a mess of it. And they should have seen this coming, frankly, in their 2 unsuccessful RFPs where no one would touch it with a 10-foot pole and help them design the system. But
yeah, that's exactly one of that's a fair thing, I think, to be very concerned about. I don't want to speculate on what will happen, but I think the reality is that people at that point would have to consider themselves owners of prohibited firearms.
So a lot
That's
of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Pierre.
that's something you have to be ready for, and that's why it's so important that we defeat this government, because even
Yes.
if we block the bill, they've still got these other tools that they're using outside of legislation to target law-abiding people through simple reclassifications.
I just have to smile here to that comment. Here was a good segue. My friend Tammy Hurd, I served on in municipal politics with her. She had the best thing. The only way to solve C-21 is to vote the government out. So that's why we'll be, whatever the next election will be. And as Shannon mentioned, you know, we're seeing that with C-10 right now. And I saw some of the comments coming through the commentary is that the other parties are ganging up. They use time allocation. You know, in a lot of cases, it's our team, the 120 of us that are there trying to raise the issue. We've had a lot of success with C-10, and we can do this the same with C-21 of letting people know this is going after our local gun clubs more than it is going after the people that are truly the issue in guns and gangs, you know, that are not law abiding by any means. So
yeah, and Eric, you know what? Can I just add to that? And I because this just makes me bananas. This isn't just a conservative claim that the liberal ideology is one that goes after law-abiding firearms owners, sports shooters, collectors, hunters, or people who have been given passed on firearms, you know, from their family members. Here is the craziest thing. That after they introduced C-21, and the Liberals, as you all know, have made this all about protecting public safety and personal safety, and they pretend that it's going to reduce crimes with firearms. They also brought in Bill C-22, and they are eliminating a number of mandatory minimums specifically to crimes committed with firearms, and the vast majority of them actually are mandatory minimums that were implemented previously under the previous Prime Minister Trudeau's Liberal government many years ago. So can you imagine this? They are effectively removing any baseline penalty for these crimes: robbery with a firearm, extortion with a firearm, weapons trafficking, importing or exporting knowing a firearm is unauthorized, discharging firearm with intent, using firearm in commission of offenses, and possession of a firearm knowing its possession is unauthorized, possession of a prohibited or restricted firearm with ammunition, possession of a weapon obtained by a commission of offense, possession for purpose of weapons trafficking, and discharging a firearm with recklessness. So sounds to me like all the kinds of things that criminal and gangbangers do, right? So while these Liberals are trying to say that C-21 will protect personal and public safety and do anything about the very reasonable concerns I think that Canadians living in cities with ever increasing gang crime and gang shootings have, they in C-22 are actually reducing penalties for those already existing offenses.
Well,
Okay,
isn't that something? Softer penalties for serious criminals and more penalties for law-abiding firearms owners. So I think that is about an easiest way you can sum up the Liberal agenda on guns. They go after the good guys and go soft on the bad guys. Well, that's the opposite of what we would do. We would get tough on violent offenders who use guns in the commission of an offense, and we would allow law-abiding people to safely and responsibly own their firearms. So that's a summary. You've got an excellent fact-rich briefing from the Shadow Minister of Public Safety, who's been kind enough to share her time with us from her home in Alberta. We're going to have her in Eastern Ontario again, hopefully to speak on these matters in person when the world reopens. And so we look forward to having you all involved. Your action items then are, if you do happen by some chance to live in the riding of a Liberal MP, please call them, tell them not to support this legislation. All your Conservative MPs are voting against it already. You're welcome to send them encouragement if you like, but don't feel need to apply any pressure because we already support law-abiding citizens. So we will be voting against this bill. Secondly, though, there are some other announcements I have. One, a video recording will be emailed to participants who RSVP'd, so look out for that. Third, you should contact your municipality and get involved in their work to tell them not to invoke the ban that the federal government is authorizing. Those are the major action items I have in front of me from Tim Duncan, Eric Duncan, who pulled together this excellent event. And Eric is just joining us to probably give us a nice sign off. So thank you again, Eric, for putting this together. Thank you to Jamie, to Michael Barrett, and to whomever else from our caucus joined but might not be on the screen right now. Many blessings, and I look forward to seeing you all safely in the days ahead. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Pierre, and thank you to Shannon. Hopefully this has been informative. And as Pierre said, keep the conversation going. You know where we stand and the work that we're doing. We've got to pressure the other parties, but at anything we can do, we ask you to keep in touch. Shannon, you've been very valuable in this. I know you've done a lot of these across the country. Pierre, thank you for supporting the Eastern Ontario crew here. And we'll get this video out. So like we said, the recording is going to go out online here as well. So we're going to ask the clubs to share it around for people who couldn't participate tonight. We had over 50 here for most of the night, but I know we had others that had indicated as well. So we know probably just as many people will watch this afterwards from the comfort of their iPad, I'm sure, in the coming days. So with that, take care, everybody. Stay well, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, thanks.